1. The frozen handprints. It was the first real snowstorm of the year when I decided to escape to my uncle's cabin deep in the mountains. The cabin was isolated, with no neighbors for miles, perfect for some solitude and peace. As I arrived, I was surprised by how untouched the snow was. It was like the world had been swallowed whole. The storm hit hard that evening, blanketing everything in thick, heavy snow. As the night drew on, I started hearing strange noises, the creaks and groans of the old cabin, or so I thought. Around midnight, I woke up feeling something cold and wet on my hand. I turned on the light and saw handprints on the window, small, frost-covered prints like someone had been pressed against the glass. Panic set in as I examined the marks, realizing there was no way for them to be made by my hands. They were much smaller, with fingers that were longer and thinner. I checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked and secure. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, unable to shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every time I dozed off, I would wake up to a feeling of being suffocated, as if a presence was lying on my chest. In the morning, the handprints were gone, as if they had never been there. But as I was packing up to leave, I noticed new prints in the snow outside, leading away from the cabin. It was as if something had walked towards the woods, and I was afraid it wasn't finished with me. I left the cabin feeling cold all over, knowing that whatever had been there with me was still lurking in the shadows. 2. The whispering trees. I had rented the cabin online, reassured by the glowing reviews of other visitors. The site described it as a peaceful retreat, nestled in the woods. When I arrived, the cabin seemed cozy enough, and the snow-covered landscape was beautiful, at least during the day. As night fell, I could feel the air grow colder, more oppressive. It wasn't long before I started hearing strange sounds, whispering voices that seemed to come from the trees outside. At first, I thought they were just echoes of the wind, but as the night went on, the voices became clearer, more distinct. The whispers were in a language I couldn't understand, a mix of tones and phrases that sent chills down my spine. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just a trick of the forest. But when I heard my name clearly called from outside, I couldn't dismiss it any longer. I stayed in the cabin, barricading myself inside, too scared to move. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until it felt as though they were all around me. Then, I started seeing things. Faint shadows in the corners of my vision, a dark figure moving behind the curtains. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind, just my imagination, but every time I turned, the shadows would dart away, retreating back into the trees. The whispers continued throughout the night, growing closer and closer until it felt like the whole cabin was breathing in sync with me. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner, covering my ears, hoping it would stop. In the morning, the cabin was silent, too silent. I left as quickly as I could, convinced that whatever had been there with me had not been human. 3. The phantom snowman. I had heard rumors about the cabin being haunted, but I thought they were just local legends, until I arrived. It was the middle of winter, and the snow had already piled up around the small log cabin, almost hiding it from view. As the sun set, I felt the temperature drop significantly, and a sense of unease settled over me. I had a small fire going, but it did little to warm the cold that seemed to seep through the walls. Around midnight, I heard the sound of footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, as if something was dragging itself across the snow. I looked out the window and saw it. A snowman, standing in the yard, its head turned towards the window. The face was carved with small, blank eyes and a twisted smile. It was huge, much larger than any snowman I had ever seen. The wind howled outside, whipping the snow around it, but the snowman remained still, almost as though it were watching me back. Every few minutes, it would move slightly. Its head would tilt or its arms would shift, and I could feel my breath catch as the realization set in. This was no ordinary snowman. It was something else, something that shouldn't be able to move at all. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. But the longer I watched, the more it felt as though the snowman was a sentient presence, a dark figure hidden beneath the layers of snow. The temperature in the cabin dropped even further, and I could see my breath in the air as I huddled by the fire, afraid to go to bed. The snowman remained there all night, watching me through the glass, until just before dawn when it suddenly toppled over, its face shattering into pieces. The cabin was still for a moment, and then the wind seemed to sigh in relief. I left before sunrise, feeling as though I had narrowly escaped something far worse than the winter cold. These stories combine elements of isolation, fear of the unknown, and the sinister influence of the supernatural to create a chilling atmosphere that lingers long after the reader has finished. Each one focuses on the terror of being alone in a place where nothing can be trusted, where even the most familiar objects can become sources of dread. Subscribe for more stories.